Good evening. Tonight I am presenting Traumatic Injury in the United States, Inpatient Epidemiology, 2000 through 2011. DiMaggio is the lead author. The agenda is as follows: background, objectives, methodology, results, conclusion. Trauma is the leading cause of death and disability for individuals less than 45 years of age. It is the single most important cause of potential years of life lost for persons under 65 years. This study examines changes in demographic characteristics of inpatient trauma injury severity, role of level 1 trauma centers, the type of trauma, most common causes of trauma, most common trauma-related surgical procedures performed, and hospital costs for care of trauma patients. Methodology: this is discharge data from U.S. Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, their healthcare cost and utilization nationwide inpatient sample. This was acquired for the years 2000 to 2011. This inpatient sample is designed to be inclusive of community hospitals in the United States, and this does include both public hospitals and academic medical centers. This study was retrospective, observational, and a descriptive analysis of a cohort of patients discharged with a ICD code consistent with trauma etiology as the inclusion criteria. Injury severity was quantified using the ICD delivery injury severity score. Randomization did not occur, and sample size was not subject to power analysis in this observational study. The following analytics were performed: severity adjusted counts, proportions, means, standard error, and 95% confident intervals. Strength and statistical significance of the beta coefficient for bivariate linear association between year and annual incidence rates were performed. Severity adjusted logistic regression analysis for the effects of year on the odds of in-hospital death with control variables for age, gender, weekday versus weekend admissions, injury severity, trauma center status, teaching hospital status, and injury severity scores. Results: a cohort of over 20 million patients was obtained. This represents 4.4% of the total all hospital discharges during the study period time. The proportion of male and female discharges was approximately evenly split, and the median age of traumatic injury discharges increased from 56 years in the year 2000 to 65 years old in the year 2011. Annual average incidence of trauma discharges were 524 per a 100,000 population. Population-based rates of traumatic injury discharges declined during the study period for children and younger adults. Increasing rates of trauma discharges were seen for individual ages 45 to 64 years. The following figure demonstrates this visually. The right-hand graph shows a relative trend upwards for the older age group of discharged trauma patients. For children on the left and younger adults in the middle, the trend was downward during the study period. Just over 450,000 inpatient deaths occurred during the study period. The in-hospital mortality was 2.4%, with a trend to decreasing mortality over the course of the study. This graph shows visually the decreasing case fatality ratio over the period of the study. 25.9% of patients were classified as having severe injury. The 18 to 44-year-old group experienced the highest proportion of severe trauma, 37%. In a comparison between teaching and non-teaching hospitals, logistic regression demonstrated that severely injured patients were more likely to be discharged from a teaching hospital with an odds ratio of 2.1. And teaching hospitals had a higher case fatality ratio, 2.8% versus 1.9%. Level 1 trauma centers had the highest proportion of severely injured patients, 39%. The most common trauma mechanisms were falls at roughly 47%, followed by motor vehicle crashes at 7.27%. The most common surgical procedures were orthopedic in nature, with repairs of the hip and femur fractures being most commonly performed. The median length of stay for all trauma patients was 3 days, with an interquartile range of 4 days, and the median length of stay for those severely injured trauma patients was 4 days, with an interquartile range of 4 days. The total cost of trauma-related inpatient care for the study period was $240 billion. That is calculated in 2010 dollars, and it represents about 6.3% of the $3.8 trillion spent on inpatient hospital costs during this time period. Costs increased annually during the study period from a cost in 2001 of $12 billion to a cost in 2011 of $29.1 billion. Several limitations are identified. The use of administrative data in health research is noted to be a blunt instrument. It often depends on coders looking at discharge records, and coders do change over time. And many relevant clinical variables are not analyzed with these discharged billing data sets. Dichotomizing injury severity is another limitation of this study, as there were only 2 variables: those patients noted to have severe injuries and those with non-severe. This left out a more continuous range of injured patients that certainly represents difference in diagnoses, mechanisms, and care patterns. Additionally, large databases are subject to information bias. Confounding this study was the fact that no geographical or seasonal stratification was available for the cohort analysis. In conclusion, we saw in this study an increased cost of care and an increase in the age of discharged patients who suffered trauma over the course of this study. We also found a greater case fatality ratio in teaching hospitals, and the proportion of severely injured patients was greater in trauma centers. These outcomes can support trauma prevention policy and projects and resource preparation for providing trauma care. I would be happy to field any questions regarding this article. Please send me an email at the above address. Thank you.